Um, we've got about 10 minutes just of a formal presentation on the insurance programme. And then obviously, as we said, opened up to questions, which will be quite informal. So we are your insurance brokers. So we are the middleman, stroke middle ladies that actually place the insurances on behalf of Paddle UK. So I've been involved looking after the insurance programme on behalf of Marsh Sport for around about 5 years. Jackie, just a little bit less than that, but I've actually got previous history from when it was British Canoeing, dating right back to 2004. So quite a lot of history as well and experience of looking after the insurances. So we've got a very brief agenda. So just some topics that we're going to cover, introduction to who we are, the insurance program, what specifically is covered, where you can find more information. We host what we call an insurance zone, and then any additional products that you may wish to purchase for your clubs. So as I said, I'm Natalie. I work in the Birmingham office of Marsh Sport, although I do travel all over the UK, dependent on where our national governing bodies of sport are. We are a sports specific team. So I've worked in the industry just over 20 years, and most of those have been specific in sport and leisure. Jackie, you happy to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm Jackie and I've worked with Natalie for a very long time. I've been in insurance even longer and have, for the last 24 years, specifically dealt with the sport and leisure sector in relation to national governing bodies, as well as clubs and coaches all the way down the line to grassroots sport. And it's something that we enjoy doing.
Thank you. Okay, so Marsh Sport, we're a specialism within Marsh. We look after over 100 national governing bodies. We've got international federations, so we've got lots of experience. And as Jackie mentioned, we do deal with clubs, individual coaches, members, volunteers, etc. So it's not just at the corporate level, but particularly important is the volunteer-led clubs as well. So in terms of the insurance programme that we have in place, obviously it was known as British Canoeing, so they're the master policy holder. So they're at the top of the tree in terms of they negotiate the premiums, the cover that we have in place, and the cover then cascades down. So there's a quick infographic on the screen to tell you that the home nations are covered, but we also cover employees, directors, officers, committee members, clubs as entities. We're ensuring the events officials, importantly the paddlers, which are members, event safety officers and coaches. So within the one policy, we are looking to ensure all of the categories of individuals that you can see on the screen. And as I say, again, just to reiterate, we are covering volunteers as well, because we appreciate obviously that most sport is run by very enthusiastic, passionate volunteers that aren't necessarily paid. So in terms of the liability cover, the insurer we have is sports cover. The policy was moved to sports cover last year. We were able to enhance the cover that was on offer. One of the important things we did last year, which was introducing some excess layers. So we increased the public liability cover up to 15 million from 10 million. And that was seen as a real benefit to the sport. So the public liability cover, this is a defence policy. So if any of the people that were noted on the previous page are sued for causing alleged damage or damage to third-party property, or if somebody sustains a bodily injury and brings a claim against the club, against a volunteer, a coach, or one of the committees of the home nations, the public liability element of the policy will respond to defend the claim. If negligence is proven, compensation will be paid out to the injured party by the insurers. And again, if the claim is successful, negligence is proven, then the legal expenses are picked up as well by the insurer. So this is to protect yourselves from bodily injury claims made against you and damage to, third-party property damage claims. Importantly, we are covering member-to-member claims. So one paddler injuring another paddler, potentially making a claim one to the other. That's an important extension that's covered. And we also have abuse cover. So any issues in terms of safeguarding, welfare, etc. There is an inner limit of 2 million on that abuse cover, which is still a significant amount, even though it's not the full 15, 2 million, when we look at abuse type claims are significantly lower than what we see a public liability claim coming at. We also provide employers' liability cover to the clubs. So whether you've got paid employees, whether you have volunteers, labour-only subcontractors, any claims made by those group of individuals, if they sustain an injury during the course of their employment, in inverted commas, and decide to make a claim against the club for negligence, the club is protected again by the employer's liability. So that's a really important area of cover. Professional indemnity, we're covering the coaching, the tuition, the instruction, the advice that's being given out, again, by whether that's volunteers providing some sort of advice in terms of running the club committee members running the club, but importantly, we're picking up the coaches and instructors and people that are leading the groups within the paddle environment there. Directors and officers, this is really important cover for individual committee members of the clubs. So anybody that is wearing an officer's hat within the club, whether it's chair, finance, welfare, etc. This is the personal liability protection. So if an individual receives a claim in their own name, as opposed to the club name, this is an officer's personal liability protection, and that's at 5 million. Just bear with me, I'm just clicking next. Okay, so in terms of where you can find more information, some clubs may already be aware that we host an insurance zone. So if you actually scan that QR code on the screen, you will be able to find details of the website that's hosted by us. It's got a huge amount of information in terms of who's covered, what's covered, some further detail. There's frequently asked questions for coaches, members, and for clubs per section. And there's also a place for downloads where you can get your evidence of insurance cover, policy schedules, policy wordings if you wanted a bit more detail. And there's also, within that insurance zone, you can access our emails directly. There's a contact us form and report any incidents if you need to. So in terms of what we currently don't provide on a sort of mandatory basis via affiliation are things like if you need your clubhouse, the craft itself, insuring any sports related equipment. If you need any cyber cover, which is a really important topic, as you're probably all aware in the media, event cancellation cover for any events that you might be hosting where you need to insure your costs, expenses and potential revenue if the event were to be cancelled prior to it taking place. And we can also provide travel insurance if any of the clubs or members are going abroad and need to have some travel insurance in place that actually covers the activity of paddling. If most holiday insurances probably wouldn't cover kayaking, canoeing, etc., to the levels that you might need that cover. So our contact details are there. As I say, there's a link there for the insurance zone, mine and Jackie's direct email addresses and our telephone numbers. That's the formal bit over. I'm sure, well, hopefully you've got some questions that you'll pose to us. So we're welcome to open up the floor now. Have you had any questions, Charlotte?
There's one question on from John asking about covering buildings and boats, and the answer is that we can do that if you pick up our email address after, just drop us a line and we will be able to sort of send any forms or even pick up a call with you to discuss any requirements that you might need for any of the additional covers.
Thank you.
There's just a sorry, another question in the chat from Bruce. What, if anything, would stop you from settling a claim?
So say that again. What would stop us?
Yeah, stop you from settling a claim.
Okay, so it's actually the insurers. So we're insurance brokers. So you would notify a particular incident to us or via Paddle UK. Obviously, then it's sent off to the insurers for them to check what the policy cover is. If the insurer feels, I mean, negligence has to be proven. They're not just going to write a check out to somebody that's trying to sue you to sort of get rid of them. So the third party that is bringing the claim against you would actually need to prove negligence. If you guys haven't been negligent, then the insurers will defend the claim and not pay the claim. They'll cover the legal costs, but they'll provide a defence. I don't know whether that's answered your question. I mean, the only other one is if you were in blatant disregard for any rules that Paddle Scotland or Paddle UK have set. So what we would say, obviously, the insurance is in place for the recognised and authorised activities of the governing body. And you must be adhering to the policies, procedures, rules set out by the governing body. You know, if there's you know, human error and it's a mistake that you haven't followed those rules, etc., then that should be fine. Where you've blatantly disregarded them, then the insurers quite rightly would say that the claim isn't going to be dealt with because you've sort of done activity that is outside of the remit of the governing body.
Brilliant, thank you. Billy, would you like to jump in and ask a question?
Yeah, basically, pardon me, sorry. Basically, all I'm looking to know is I'm not affiliated with a club anymore, but I'm looking at the moment to start up my own small paddling business. And it was just to see what, I'm obviously a fully paid up member of Paddle Scotland, but I'm looking to see what the insurance cover is that we're entitled to through Paddle Scotland, what that actually covers. I'm just a bit unsure.
Okay. If you're an individual coach, Billy,
Yep.
you're allowed to use a trading name. And I think, Jackie, off the top of my head, correct me if I'm wrong, you're allowed to turn over up to 30,000 as income.
Right, yeah, 30,000 threshold.
To be covered under the insurances we've just gone through. If you've set up a limited company or you're turning over more than 30,000, you're going to have a separate business policy, which we can do for you. So we would look at emulating what we've talked about today, but providing it to you as a small business, and we'd provide that insurance to you directly.
Okay, and do you also arrange policies to cover multiple craft?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we do. Yeah. We use a company called Geo. So they have a craft insurance policy. So there are some links, I think, through Paddle UK and another provider that you might find on the Paddle UK website. That's more for individuals that want to insure their craft, I understand. It's not through us. But as a business or, you know, a club, if you wanted to insure your sports equipment and numerous craft, we can certainly look at that for you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
If I could just jump back to the chat super quickly, there's a question about sharing the slide pack. Natalie, would you be able to? Absolutely. I think you have shared that with me, actually.
Yeah, you're happy for you to share it, of course.
Perfect. I'll include that link to the insurance zone and perhaps the contact details as well in the post webinar email.
Absolutely.
All right, brilliant. And then if we go to Louisa for a question, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to address like the standards for deployment and just make sure that I'm absolutely clear. Like obviously if we're, you know, like how far, like obviously we, you know, I'm from Lothian Sea Kayak Club, and obviously we'll attempt as far as possible to be compliant with the standards for deployment. But it, you know, is how far will that be kind of taken into consideration if, you know, within the kind of insurance framework?
that might be a question more for Paddle Scotland, actually, if it's around what from an insurance perspective, we don't set the requirements for deployment. It's back to the governing body. So you need to be working within, you know, a coach or a leader needs to be working within their remit. You know, they must be appropriately qualified to deliver the activity or coach the activity that they're coaching. But that's a question, I think, probably for yourself, Charlotte, if not a colleague of yours. So apologies for passing that back. But if you were blatantly disregarding what the governing body is setting, that's when I think we would question whether a claim would be paid. And I think Paddle UK would probably question. If, as I say, if it's something that you haven't blatantly disregarded and you've, you know, accidentally done something, then arguably it would be covered. But that's a question really for the governing body.
Yeah, I think the issue for us is that the standards for deployment kind of passes some of that responsibility for determining what's a safe practice onto clubs, and therefore it's difficult for us to determine how much is our liability. You know, if we've set our own within what we think is compliant with the standards for deployment, we've set our own safe practices, but it's not entirely clear to me, you know, what is our liability, what is Paddle Scotland's liability. Could we, you know, could there be argument that we're not compliant? Like I think there's quite a lot of grey area within that, and it's it's a little bit confusing for us as a club.
Yeah, what I would say is super important is risk assessments. Is if you deem that you're using particular equipment or not using particular equipment, for example, you need to document that decision-making process. So, and that's really important in the event of a claim. So if obviously there must be minimum standards of requirement, minimum standards of deployment, presumably set by the governing body as with all sports. And then you need to make sure that that is appropriate for your club environment. And that would then be risk assessed, I presume, and that documentation of how you've come to that decision, that thought process, keeping that, you know, I don't mean it on paper, but recorded is super important. Because in the defence of a claim, the insurers, you know, to defend you are going to be looking at how did you make that decision and why. And if that was in the best interest, that's fine. Accidents do happen. It doesn't mean that you're not insured. They would look at that decision-making process. I don't know whether that's helped, Louisa.
Yeah, I just think it's quite, like, as someone's kind of put in the chat, like a lot of the decision making is dynamic. So you might go out, you might go into a situation, you know, which is within the club's guidance and within the standards for deployment, and you might find yourself in a situation where which has evolved, and people are then having to make decisions in the moment. So it's quite a complicated,
like a dynamic risk assessment. That's absolutely and the insurers completely understand that. It can't always be textbook, because weather conditions can change, for example, can't they? Or you might have a participant turn up that you didn't expect. So, you know, I think as long as you're sort of carrying out that duty of care and doing everything reasonably possible, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have no insurance in place because you haven't followed everything to the absolute nth degree. Accidents do happen. So, you know, again, it would come down to why did you make that decision? Why did you change? I don't mean bend the rules, but, you know, if you've had to change a particular process to accommodate the change in weather, for example, then that is absolutely fine. We're not saying that you would not be insured.
Thanks.
I'll go back to the chat for another question. Do you have any advice on how long to hold records for example, members attending club sessions, things like that?
Yeah, that's quite a, Jackie, was you going to answer that one then?
I was going to say that the policy with regard to liability falls under the statute regulations which are laid down, and where there is a personal injury incident, the requirement is 3 years from a date of an incident, that you become aware of an incident, so that the insurance programme falls back to the actual laws and statutes that are in place within the legal framework. And for property damage, it's up to 6 years. And I think the same goes for the professional indemnity from memory.
Mm-hmm.
But we can drop an email back through Paddle Scotland to distribute any of the answers to the questions that are raised in a bit more detail for you.
Yeah, I think that would be hugely helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
A question here, possibly going back to what was said before, which may have been covered, but around the wording of what would be blatant versus not blatant, which I suppose is that having your decision making and risk assessment, like dynamic risk assessments, and just evidencing your thought process and what led you to make the decision that you made.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. That another question just popped up.
There was a question regarding how many claims have been made within voluntary clubs. We'd have to look at our data on that.
Yeah. What I would say is, though, that Paddle UK, including the home nations, has an excellent claims experience.
Yeah.
So sometimes, obviously, we do hear and we notify fatalities, but they are a dreadful accident as opposed to anybody being negligent in any way. Sometimes we'll have third-party property damage claims where people were, taking the craft off the roof of their car and they've damaged the car next to them. But actually, considering how many thousands of people and hundreds of clubs that we're insuring, there is an excellent claims experience. And there was a significant claim, but it was well over 10 years ago. So things, touch wood, are running well. There's another one from John about trip leaders. I think, again, that's more of a governing body question rather than insurance, potentially. So it's making sure somebody, I think there's also, I think from Paddle UK's perspective, you are able to be sort of risk assessed to see whether you are an appropriate person to carry out an activity if it's leading. Obviously, coaching is a little bit different where it's formal coaching. And I see you mentioned lifelong experience. I'm pretty sure James Hinvers, Charlotte at Paddle UK, has a flowchart about that. It might be worth getting in touch and sharing that with the group.
Yeah,
he does. He does, Natalie. If I can just come
Yes.
live, he does.
Yep.
And there's a whole, there's like a 24-page document of what you have to comply with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it lists qualifications that are acceptable and not acceptable. The challenge there is that people aren't going to meet those qualifications by the due date.
Okay.
Partly because they got experience and they don't want to take another qualification. Or they just say, well, I won't lead trips then. Or they say, well, I won't lead trips, but I'll just do collaborative paddles or informal paddles where insurance doesn't apply. And that's an issue to face about how do we respond to that. Will we continue to run trips with people who aren't qualified, or will that invalidate our insurance? Paddle UK are very vague on the subject.
Okay. Yeah. I can't comment whether they're obviously vague or not, John. Unfortunately, that is
No, you can't. No, that would be unfair.
I can't, I'm afraid.
Let me say, it appears vague to me, and we keep trying to seek clarity, and we think we've got it, and then something else comes up, and then we're just not sure. but we're worried that Paddle UK are coming up with more and more rules that we risk tripping over. I'll give you a couple of silly examples that you can say, would they affect the insurance? So I've had something from them saying your welfare officer hasn't done the time to listen course, red light. Your secretary hasn't done on the committee, hasn't done the safeguarding course. So I'm asking those things, if there was an incident, what sort of impact did they have on the insurance? They never existed in the past. And frankly, you're lucky to find a welfare officer.
I know.
You're
I
lucky
think
to
you could
find
say
a
the same across
secretary.
all sport, John. Yeah.
And the rules are starting to make it more difficult to get people, and causing us to think about, do we disaffiliate because we're not getting the benefit? And my subsequent question was, if we disaffiliated, so if we were nothing to do with Paddle UK, could you give a separate cover based on a situation that we would describe, which might feel like I've described, that no, she won't do the time to listen course. Will you keep us covered? No, the secretary's based in Scotland, so Paddle UK don't pick up the qualification. Clearly, that's a nonsense, and you'd cover that. But could you listen to those things separately, out with Paddle UK, and give us a separate quote?
I think you would find it wouldn't necessarily be us that wouldn't quote. It may well be the insurers that don't. So I think an insurer would take the same view that somebody, within the club should be appropriately informed with regards to welfare and safeguarding. And I think the insurers would say, if there isn't somebody within the club that has that knowledge, that would be a red flag to them, to be honest, John. So you might find that some insurers may be less stringent than others, but where we have abuse cover in place, there are certain parameters that needs to be met. So I think, obviously, that is a very difficult subject anyway, and there really
it's just to make it a yes or no. Would it be possible to explore that with you about having our own cover as a club, or could you get that? I've got a separate policy with Geo, which is for the boats and the buildings and various other safety things, and it duplicates the Paddle UK cover because it's got member to member. It's got public liability. It's just double covered. It doesn't have trustee liability because we rely on Paddle UK. But could I come via you to say, right, we'll go entirely to Geo, we'll forget Paddle UK because we can't comply with the standards for deployment? I'm hypothetical here because obviously we're going to try our best to comply. But if we get into these nonsense things where somebody's got a lifetime of experience, which I think an insurer would listen to, and Paddle UK still give me a red light, I'm going to say to Paddle UK, no, you've become too rule bound. I need to get my own cover and be sure I'm covered, and talk to somebody who can cover me separately.
Yeah, we wouldn't, as Marsh Sport, we wouldn't look to insure clubs that disaffiliate or sit outside of the governing body programme. So apologies, John, but we wouldn't be able to do that for you. What I would say in terms of conditions, the insurers do set coaching conditions. So they'll say a coach has to be appropriately qualified by the relevant body. They have to have a minimum of 3 years experience, etc. And even most insurers will set that qualification threshold, I'm afraid. Don't know about insurers where you can get online quotes, for example, but most insurers, Jackie, I think you would agree, do have a coaching condition. So I understand it's difficult for what you're saying, John. I'm not sure who you're talking to at Paddle UK, who your contact is within. Do you speak to Lee Pooley, or do you go via Paddle Scotland?
Well, I belong to clubs in England and Scotland. I'm really talking about the English end.
Okay, so I would recommend
Scotland. The Scottish club is well covered.
I would recommend talking to Lee Pooley, who's head of coaching at Paddle UK. Yeah, he's been there a long time. So it's Lee and then Pooley. He's a fantastic source of knowledge and a good guy. So I would suggest having a chat with Lee, if that's okay.
Thank you. I'll let someone else have a go.
There's a question in the chat about the limits of activity covered. So loading and unloading boats, warming up, games off the water, things like that, camping as part of a paddling expedition.
Yeah, that's all covered. That's an easy one. Yes, is the answer. There's public liability cover in place for those things that you've mentioned as examples. We get camping a lot, actually, camping questions. And as long as it's part of a, you know, the predominant activity is paddling, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, Insure for Sport, I am aware of them. Yeah, it's interesting. They use one of the main insurers as well. I think that's like a quote and buy facility, Insure for Sport. Not sure who. Okay. Is there any other questions at all? Marjorie? See you waving, but you're on mute at the moment.
There. There was a question before on the question of more experienced paddlers who have been training members for an awful long time. And you did say there was a document or something that we could look at, or
I think, John, did you refer to that document as well? Yeah, I've certainly seen a document that it was shared with me probably 18 months, 2 years ago, where it was talking about somebody that's not necessarily qualified but working towards qualification, or what is acceptable in terms of experience. So, and that was a document. I don't know how up to date it is, Charlotte, though, so it might be that you want to. It was James Hinvers at Paddle UK. I think he's still in Paddle UK, although he may have changed departments, but it was like a bit of a flowchart document that explained what they would accept, basically. I know, John, you mentioned there's a lengthier document. I'm not sure whether that flowchart is within that.
I suppose my query is more, it's not somebody who's working towards those, but they've done them several years, you know,
Yeah.
many years ago, and it's whether or not they need to update totally, or whether we're happy with the experience that they've got.
Yeah, and apologies, Marjorie, I don't mean to pass the buck, but that's a question for the governing body. So,
right, Charlotte, over to you.
I'll pass that on to my colleague Adam. Yeah. I will definitely follow up on that document. I've not spoken to, is it James?
James, yeah,
Hinvers,
so it's Hinves. I think his role has slightly changed within Paddle UK, but he's been there a very long time, and he should know what we're referring to.
Perfect.
He's very helpful. So
yeah, I'll look to follow that up in terms of that document and check whether that is up to date and something we can share, or if that's been superseded.
Yeah, as I say, it was a good while ago. I remember having to share it with the insurers to make sure they were comfortable with it as well. So apologies, Marjorie, I can't give you a straight answer.
Also, that's fine. But also on the question of the buildings and boats insurance, I mean, I have no idea. What do you have an indicative figure or anything of the costs, or does it really depend? I know it's sort of how long is a piece of string, and
it's a bit like quoting for your house insurance. It depends on what it's worth, what your content sums insured are. So I can't say. I mean, it really depends on the craft itself, the value, the replacement value, how many you have. It's completely bespoke quotes to clubs.
Yeah,
dependent on what your own needs are.
Okay, I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Right, can I come in with a question?
Yes, hi Rachel.
Hi, because I've been putting them into the chat. This business about, I'm quite interested to know, for voluntary clubs, what the kind of record is in terms of negligence claims, etc. And part of the reason I'm asking this is because obviously everybody is very aware that with a commercial operator in Haverfordwest, where there were
Yes.
4 people died,
Mhm.
you know, that was a dreadful thing to happen. But as far as I'm aware, and I'm up in Scotland, you can hear the accent's English, but I'm up in Scotland. I'm not aware of anything like this having happened with voluntary clubs. And at the same time, this is all, you know, there's a good question here, because it seems like Paddle UK are taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut with regards to the standards for deployment in voluntary clubs. So I'd like to get an idea, you know, how many negligence claims are put in for voluntary, in connection with voluntary clubs. So we're not talking about equipment damage here. We're actually talking about something happening to people on trips.
Okay, is that within the paddle world or across sport? Because we
Just
definitely have
within paddling,
just
the
within
paddling
paddle.
community,
Okay.
and within voluntary organisations,
Yeah.
not commercial.
Okay, I don't have the claims experience to hand, Rachel. I didn't think we'd be asked for the specific details on claims, but I am more than happy to go through the claims experience and share that information with Charlotte for her to share afterwards. Absolutely, no problem at all.
That would be really helpful, because if it turns out there's virtually nothing, then I think as you know, clubs, we need to get back to Paddle UK and say we're being unfairly disadvantaged simply because of things that have happened with commercial operators.
Yeah, I mean, we look after a huge amount of different sports, and I can guarantee you there are certainly claims against voluntary organisations, whether there's a volunteer, you know, on the committee or not. It's irrelevant whether somebody's a limited company or not. If there is somebody accountable and somebody has been negligent, they will certainly go after the person, whether they are a limited company or whether they're a voluntary, not-for-profit club. I think
Oh no,
Jackie did say.
I'm happy to hear about that, but I've actually asked this of the operations manager at Paddle Scotland in the past, and one who'd been with our organisation for over 20 years unfortunately stepped down round about January of this year. But up until my last conversation with him in January, he was not aware of any incidents that have happened within voluntary clubs in Scotland.
Okay, we do have it. I'm sure we have it listed by club, don't we, Jackie? I think so. We could find out
I'm
where.
just looking at it now.
Oh, you
just
found
to
it?
have, yeah.
Okay, right.
And I was just trying to pick any off here that are Scottish.
Okay. If I just answer John's question, if we come back to Jackie a moment while she's just scanning the claims experience. John, I would certainly recommend a risk assessment for informal paddles, even if it's one risk assessment and the topic is informal paddles. Obviously, you wouldn't need to do a risk assessment for every informal paddle that takes place, but there should be a framework risk assessment. And we would obviously recommend that those risk assessments are reviewed, you know, periodically and retained, certainly. Informal actually can be sometimes where the accidents do occur in sport, and particularly social activity, actually. We've seen some serious claims rather than the actual sporting activity. So, but yeah, that's I would definitely recommend.
Yeah. Just looking at the claims experience, we haven't had the one for the current year, but up until the end of last year, by the look of this, there were quite a lot from English clubs, but none from Scottish clubs on this list.
Okay.
But as I say, I haven't had the experience for 2025 yet.
John,
well,
you mentioned.
thank you for for that, because that's basically is confirming what the operations manager said, So I mean, I think it is quite significant up here to suggest that people are actually being quite cautious, doing risk assessments and running trips safely. And it's a bit concerning that there's sort of an awful lot more tightening up of rules that are possibly not really, the insurance situation wouldn't suggest that all of this is necessary up in Scotland anyway.
Yeah. I think that there was a property damage one, but that it's not a negligence injury claim, but there was a property damage where, as Natalie mentioned earlier, people taking kayaks off roofs and clipping the vehicle next to them. So there was one of those which was
but that's I'm sorry, but that's not the real ones are what happens if somebody is injured on the river. That's the situation that would require rules to be tightened up.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, that's the only one that I can see from a club perspective. And it's not a negligence or bodily injury loss. It's a property damage one. So that's all that's on there.
Is that in the last 12 months, did you say, Jackie?
No, I've not had the last 12 months yet.
All right. Okay. John, as long as, I mean, it's Paddle UK would need to give us permission to share the claims experience. Obviously, we can easily anonymise it. They're the policy holder. I don't see why they would have any issue with us sharing it, but that they would need to give us permission to do so. Neil, you mentioned if somebody tells you in writing what their experience is, do you need to make them do practical demonstration? I suppose it depends on the role they're carrying out. Are we talking coaching? Neil Black has asked a question.
No, I'm talking about people going on led trips.
Okay, as in a participant. So if it was me, the paddler.
Yeah. So I mean, they're on led trips led by qualified leaders, but they themselves might not have any qualifications, but they would state their experience, and we might have taken them through some kind of induction. But for other people, we might not. If they say they've got significant experience from before, we wouldn't normally make them do stuff just to prove that they have that experience. So if they are stating that they have experience, can we rely on that, or do we have to back that up by making them demonstrate it?
From an insurance, there's no requirement that you need to make them demonstrate their ability. I mean, it would be sensible if someone was going to coach, you would expect them, rather than just look at a CV. It's a bit, as I say, it depends on the role that they're carrying out. If they're leading a group or they're coaching, then I think it would be sensible.
No, I'm just talking about participants, really.
Participants. So I could turn up and say, oh, I've done absolutely loads of this. And within 5 minutes, you'd probably tell that I'd only done it once before. So I would say, well, what would you do kind of in that situation where you found out that perhaps the person has over-egged the pudding and actually they're not very experienced? Would you then, Neil, turn around and kind of say, well, I'm afraid you're not as experienced. We can see that you're not as experienced as we were perhaps led to believe. You would presumably ask them to leave the session potentially because they could get themselves in danger, couldn't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I would have no problem with that. I mean, the safety of the group is paramount now. So one individual person, if I have to put them ashore at the nearest available place or even not let them start, that's totally what I would do.
You'd rather deal with a complaint from them than an accident happening, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But
I think we have to take people at face value. We trust that most people aren't sort of telling lies. So I don't think you need to make them do a demonstration. I think if the person was an experienced leader or coach, I think they'd spot it pretty quickly if somebody was, as I say, over-egging it, their experience. I think it's the important bit is then calling it a day. That's really important, because if you continue because you don't want to upset somebody and there is an accident, arguably then the person that was leading has failed in their duty of care. So that would worry me more. Thank you. So any other questions? Charlotte, are you still online?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, there you are. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong box.
No, I've not vanished off. I'm still here. Yeah, I'll give it another wee minute or so in case someone's typing away.
Okay.
Get a question in, and then
That's fine. Well, you'll have the presentation shared, which has got mine and Jackie's email addresses and telephone numbers. And do please have a look at that insurance zone. Trustees cover, John, whether you're a trustee or an officer, they still have that personal liability cover under the directors and officers. Some people call it management liability, some people call it directors and officers. But if you're a trustee, that is absolutely fine. We double check this, didn't we, Jackie, with insurers,
Yes, we
and
did.
trustees are definitely indemnified and are covered. Yes.
Had various cases where trustees have been worried about this,
Yeah.
and people coming on to be trustees ask you questions, and you say, yes, you're covered. And they say to you, well, when would I not be covered? What would cause me not to be covered? What's my chance of putting my house on the line? Or
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and you try to reassure them and say, we've got cover in place. So I'm looking for a bit from you about where the boundaries lie there. You know, we talked about an accident with an unqualified leader. We talked about a welfare officer who hasn't done the course. Can you say what sort of things might cause trustees to be excluded from cover?
The trustees or the directors and officers cover is there for any mismanagement really of the organisation in terms of the decision they're making. So it's covering their role as a trustee. If they have deliberately, for example, they've committed fraud within the club and it's a criminal act, that is not going to be insured. If they have inadvertently transferred funds, that's a different matter. So where there's a criminal act, they are definitely not covered, and that goes across the insurance policy for anything we're talking about, actually. But you know, if it's mismanagement of the club funds and it's a genuine error, John, then they would be covered. It's where they're committing a criminal act that they wouldn't be.
Okay, so it's more about management of the entity.
Yeah, well, whatever their role is as a trustee.
Than it is about them being liable for something that happens on the water.
Yes, yeah, unless of course for some reason they were brought into that claim as a committee or trustee member of the club, then they would still be covered by the policy, because you might find that an injured party decides to sue the coach that was in charge of the session, and actually they then go against the committee members because they were the ones that had recruited the coach that wasn't qualified, for example. So you might get a solicitor's letter against the coach and then the club committee members or the trustees, and again they would be covered by the policy, subject to the policy terms and conditions. Have we missed a couple of questions? In terms of differentiating between peer paddles and collaborative paddles, again, that's a question for the governing body in terms of what their parameters are and how they describe and define the peer paddles against collaborative paddles. In my mind, those two activities are insured via the insurance policy, but in terms of how they are run or, you know, collaborated in terms of the collaborative paddle, that's a question for the governing body. Okay, Lorna, you've said what liability does a full committee have if good processes are demonstrably in place and demonstrably disseminated, but the instructor, for example. So in that situation, the committee would be insured. The instructor, again, if they have blatantly disregarded rules or processes, I think, you know, quite rightly, the Paddle Scotland or Paddle UK might say that person's on their own because they have had a blatant disregard. It's different again, as I say, if they've genuinely missed something, then they would be covered. It's that blatant disregard or the criminal aspect to it where somebody would not be provided with the indemnity under the insurance. I don't know if that's answered your question, Lorna. Okay. Hope so. Okay, so Charlotte, thank you. Lorna, if you need any further details, just get in touch with us directly. They're all kind of what if questions, so it's quite hard sometimes to say yes, it's covered, no, it's not, because there's always grey areas, isn't there? But hopefully we've provided you with a bit more information on the insurance than at sort of 7 o'clock tonight. Hopefully it's been helpful to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. If there are any further questions or anything else, then as I say, I'll send out a post-webinar email that'll have various links that I've noted down. So a link to the insurance zone, the contact details for Natalie and Jackie, and the slides that you shared with me as well. And also a wee feedback form, if you could please fill that in. But yeah, thank you very much, Natalie and Jackie, for your time this evening and that presentation. Thank you to everyone on the call for your engagement. That's been really great. And yeah, I hope that was informative and helpful for you all as well. So thank you for coming along and joining the webinar this evening. So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there, and I'll let everyone go on and get on with the rest of your evening. I hope you have a lovely evening, and do look out for that email coming through to you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.